So I'm very excited about this conversation that we're about to have. We're honored to be joined by United States Senator Bill Hagerty. Senator Hagerty is currently running for re-election to his second term in the Senate. Previously, he served as our nation as U.S. Ambassador to Japan and served our state as Commissioner of Economic and Community Development. Before that, he had a successful career investing in and growing businesses, which gives him a unique perspective on the impact of public policy on the private sector. And just editorial comment, Senator Hagerty is doing a fantastic job representing our state. We should be very proud of him, and we're very fortunate to have him in that role. Joining Senator Hagerty for the conversation is Hank Holland. Hank is the chairman and CEO of Amaero, a leading domestic manufacturer of refractory and alloy powders used in 3D printing for defense, aerospace, and nuclear and medical applications. Hank and his team led a restructuring of Amaero and relocated the company from Australia to Tennessee. Amaero's domestic production is addressing critical bottlenecks in the advanced materials and manufacturing supply chain. Hank's an engineer by education, but has spent his career in finance. So both Hank and Senator Hagerty bring deep experience in understanding capital markets and why companies make the decisions and the investments that they make in terms of expansions and other strategic business decisions. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Senator Bill Hagerty and Hank Holland to share their insights. Gentlemen, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
So our event today is focused on innovation and manufacturing, as you heard me say, and we're trying to help tell the story of the opportunities that we have here in Tennessee when it comes to manufacturing. So I'd like to start with getting each of your perspectives, start with you, Senator Hagerty, just from a high level on how Tennessee is positioned to compete when it comes to innovation, particularly in the manufacturing sector.
Well, I had the great privilege of making that case every day the time that I served as economic development chief here in Tennessee in Governor Haslam's cabinet. If you think about it, first and foremost, we have a tremendous critical mass of manufacturing already here and a workforce that knows how to make things. I think that is a very key selling point. But we got a couple of other things that I think you ought to keep in mind. One, if you're thinking about locating a manufacturing operation, you're going to consider a number of factors. Is it a right-to-work state? We are. Those states that are not tend to not do very well in the competition. I remember the governor of Kentucky calling me after he'd taken office. He'd seen the Tennessee miracle occur, and he said, "How is it that you guys always win?" I said, "You'll never be at the table as long as you're not a right-to-work state," and that was one of the first things he changed was to address that. The other pieces of it, I think, are industry dependent, but manufacturing firms, particularly those that do just-in-time manufacturing, need really strong logistics. And we have a wonderful logistics infrastructure here in Tennessee. There's no mystery why FedEx is located in Memphis, UPS's hub is located in Louisville. Where we are right now is about equidistant between the two. Lots of great highways, rail, water access that just make Tennessee a great place of choice. And we can access roughly 2/3 of the population in a day's drive from here. Energy is another critical factor. And the Tennessee Valley Authority is, in Tennessee, the sole provider of electricity. And I'm, in my current job, pressed very hard to make certain that TVA is staying ahead of the demand so that we can provide reliable, low-cost energy and continue to do that. Absent that, huge competitive disadvantage. And you see this happen across the United States. Various states that can't provide the energy necessary for the next wave of manufacturing are losing out. And finally, I'd say this. We've got a business climate and a tax climate that put us way ahead of the game. And certain states are spending a lot of time raising taxes because they can't seem to get their fiscal house in order. And that means that manufacturers are going to be one of the obvious targets for them to address their fiscal issues. That's not the case in Tennessee. We have the strongest balance sheet of any state in the nation. And I marketed that heavily when we were marketing to other companies. Business people understand that. And many states do not have the type of balance sheet that we do. And as business leaders begin to think about how that's going to rectify itself, are the states going to straighten up? Will the politicians figure it out, or will they just come after the businesses? And I think we know the answer in a lot of cases will lead those manufacturers to Tennessee.
Sounds like you've made that pitch before. Hank, from a business leader's perspective, how is Tennessee positioned for success in innovation and manufacturing?
Yeah, I would echo everything the senator said, and I would add to that, there's something really special in Tennessee. I'm a seventh-generation Texan, and I spent 27 years in San Francisco, and Tennessee is what Texas was 25 or 30 years ago. Unfortunately, the state's lost the ability to be responsive and agile and respond to business opportunities the way it used to. I moved to San Francisco in January of 1992. It might have been one of the greatest cities in the world. It's been absolutely destroyed. It's been destroyed, and the ethics of the city, it's one of the things that's very hard to just explain about a place. Part of what I love about Tennessee is the appreciation, the regard, the respect for blue-collar workers, for middle America workers. If you look at the country today, we've got an average salary of about $65,000. Tennessee, albeit, is less than that. But the gap between the manufacturer worker and the average worker is much, much tighter in Tennessee. The average salary in Tennessee is about $56,000. It's about $4,000 less for a manufacturing job. By way of example, we're outside Chattanooga. The lowest paid job we have in the factory is $65,000 a year. We've got open position for welders at $125,000. Elsewhere in the country, we've stigmatized these jobs, right? We've convinced kids to get $200,000 of debt and get a philosophy degree. And I love that about the state of Tennessee. And by the way, if you go back in 1980, we had about 20 million manufacturing jobs in the country, but most were in California, the Great Lakes, and the Northeast. The resurgence today is being led by Tennessee and other states like Indiana and Ohio and Georgia and Alabama, but it's the Southwest and the Southeast and the Midwest that are leading this resurgence in manufacturing. It's one of the true bright spots of the entire country.
So the COVID pandemic, it highlighted a reality that is an unfortunate reality, that the U.S. had been and maybe still is too dependent on China, Russia, and other countries for some of the very foundational manufacturing and supply chain needs that we have. How did we get, as a country, how did we get from being the most advanced industrialized country after World War II to where we are today?
Well, if you'll bear with me for a bit of a history lesson, we'll go through it. You mentioned World War II being the starting point of the question. Well, right after World War II, the United States put in place very favorable terms of trade with countries whose economies had been devastated by the war. We did that in Europe, we did it in Japan. Why did we do that? Because we didn't want those countries turning toward communism. And the red threat was very prevalent in China, Soviet Russia, North Korea, certainly in Japan. All of those actors were pressing very hard. So we put in very favorable terms of trade. What we failed to do post-World War II is put a time limit on it, or put a GDP per capita limit, or some sort of upward bound, so that when I wind up back in Japan in 2017 as ambassador, we've got an extraordinarily imbalanced relationship. And if you looked at it across the globe, the United States had the lowest tariff barriers of any major economy. China's a little bit different story. I'll get to that in a minute. But the lowest tariff barriers of any major economy. And we tried and tried and tried. We actually got 2 trade deals done with Japan. We renegotiated the Korean-U.S. trade deal, KORUS they call it. We renegotiated NAFTA into what is now the USMCA. But it was extraordinarily difficult because the other countries didn't want to come to the table. Why? Because they already had a better deal. At one point, you may remember this, the 3 zeros were put on the table. That means 0 tariffs, 0 non-tariff barriers, which means regulation, regulatory barriers, and 0 subsidies. And Josh, do you know how many countries came to the table on the 3-0 premises? You got it, 0. 0. Nobody wanted to deal with us on a no-tariff basis. President Trump comes back into office this time and decides to address it early and address it quick. I was in the Rose Garden when he made the announcement. And it was a very, very abrupt move. I think it put a lot of countries on notice. They needed to come to the table and deal with us. Let's talk about China. While I was ambassador to Japan, we negotiated the phase 1 trade deal with China. In fact, the same team that helped me with the 2 trade deals in Japan was the team that was working on China phase 1. And the reason they were working in Tokyo is because you can't go to China and do the work because you're going to be surveilled there. So I had a lot of input with Bob Lighthizer and Jameson Greer, his deputy. Jameson's now the U.S. trade rep, and Bob is still advising from the side. But our efforts then were to try to deal with China in a much more realistic way. You go back to 2001, when China acceded to the WTO, the thought back then was we exposed the Chinese economy to market dynamics, that they would begin to behave more like us, that they would engage in the broader global economy in a way and in a similar manner that we operate. That turned out not to be the case at all. China is the most predatory nation on the planet. They steal our intellectual property. I've had it stolen from me. They erect massive regulatory barriers. You cannot get in and compete. If you want to, you've got to take on a Chinese partner. You've got to put your data on their side of the firewall. It is extraordinarily difficult to compete in China. And by the way, they subsidize the hell out of their industries. And we've got to deal with China in a much different way, and you'll see that manifest itself, I think, pretty soon because President Trump is rescheduling his upcoming meeting with President Xi. It's going to be a different dynamic. Last meeting they had was to deal with critical rare earth minerals that, and Hank knows a lot more about this than anybody else in the room, I'm sure. But dealing with them and their choke point on rare earth. And now we're going to be talking from a little bit different posture because China's access to below market oil and from Venezuela, energy from Iran, that's been significantly changed. So leverage in the playing field is going to be a lot different this next meeting. It's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Hank, your thoughts on how this dynamic has changed over time?
Yeah, it begs the question, if there was ever a sense of urgency, you would think it would be now. And to some extent there is, and I give enormous credit to this administration, and thank God for the first term, right? Thank God for the things we got started. We invested in this business in May of 2022 during the prior administration. And the reason I had so much confidence at the time, not knowing if Trump would yet again be our president, excuse me, it's not only a matter of national security, it's a matter of economic development, right? And it's the one thing, we have very few things in this country today that are bipartisan, as we know. But I do think in the economic development side, albeit the prior administration, the good news is they didn't cancel any of Trump's policies, but they did a really poor job of carrying on those policies. And so we were stagnant essentially for 4 years. And now yet again, we're building on those policies. And there's been an abruptness to it, but there's got to be an abruptness to it. I mean, we're in a somewhat desperate situation. We've atrophied our entire industrial base in this country. And if you look at the debt situation, and this is due to the trade imbalance and the current account imbalance the senator mentioned, for our children's sake and our grandchildren's sake, we can't afford to wait 4 more years. We can't afford to wait 8 more years. And the challenge that we have right now that's, I think, less apparent to the average person is those that we considered our greatest allies, in many cases, have been the foe that enabled this Chinese behavior. And so our allies to the north today, we've got transshipment issues of using the Canadian border to bring in these goods from China, avoiding the very tariffs we have in place. And so USMCA and other talks that will go on. But it's a really complicated issue, and I think one thing that's come about with the recent conflict that we've got in the Middle East, it is just time, and these are difficult conversations, but we have to reevaluate all of the relationships with our allies. And we have to find a relationship that makes economic sense as well as national security sense. And by its nature, it's a difficult conversation.
So both of you have spent significant portions of your careers investing in companies. So you have a unique perspective on the factors that go into those investment decisions and then how companies choose to make capital investments beyond that. So Hank, I want to start with you and then come to Senator Hagerty. Hank, talk about Amaero and what led to your investment in that company and then your decision to relocate to Tennessee. And then Senator Hagerty, have the reasons for companies relocating here or expanding here changed from when you served as commissioner to now? And if so, what are some of those reasons? So start with you, Hank.
So as an investor in small businesses, I've always been particularly attracted to opportunities. We've got something we call a TAM, or total addressable market. That's a small enough TAM that we don't anticipate or attract a lot of competition, and we've got healthy margins, but a large enough TAM to build a sizable business. And moreover, having come through COVID, as you mentioned, and all the things that became so clear, I wasn't aware that we were reliant on China for the manufacture of antibiotics, as an example. Right, all of these, critical foundational capabilities, it turns out we no longer had a domestic production capability. I then found myself, I was in Lviv in Ukraine the night the first Russian cruise missile came in and blew up a fuel depot about a quarter mile from us. And it just became so clear to me that the U.S. was going to have to reindustrialize. And I came back and looked at 19 businesses, which led to the investment in Amaero. From my standpoint, the way the country will have to address, and the senator gave a great perspective post-World War II. The other thing that came into play when the Iron Curtain came down was and this is in the Clinton administration, we had the benefit of, quote, the peace dividend. And we literally met with 51 defense primes at the time and said, we can no longer afford this industrial base. Today we have 5 defense primes. And what comes with that is we've got all these single points of failure throughout our entire supply chain. And the one way you can address quickly these single points of failure is leveraging, scaling, and creating more resiliency via our small and mid-sized businesses, right? And that's something I think, again, Tennessee is so well suited to do. We were looking at 5 other states. Tennessee was the last that we engaged with. Governor Bill Lee, Stuart McWhorter, Edward Birch at the time was in the commissioner's office. We're unbelievably agile. Again, we were much further down the way with these other states. It was 5 weeks from the very first meeting. You would appreciate this, Senator, in your former. It was 5 weeks from the very first meeting to when we signed binding agreements and announced move to Tennessee. And I'll tell you, in many cases, that's when the state goes away. You never see them again. The state has only been more activated. The state's only been a better partner since then. And I would add as well, the delegation in Capitol Hill of the state of Tennessee is unbelievable. The senator's office has been unbelievably responsive to staff. Our other great senator in the state's been very responsive with her staff. We happen to be in the district of Congressman Chuck Fleischmann, who's been a great advocate for nuclear energy in the state. We'll talk about a lot of things, but I think nuclear energy is one of those areas of the state that the forward vision of the senator and the state, it's remarkable what's been done here, leveraging TVA and the other assets. But you want to talk about AI, you don't get AI without data centers. You don't get data centers without energy, right? There's no state better positioned, right, for these new technologies in Tennessee.
And I think the question was, what's changed from the time that I served as economic development chief? Well, something changed dramatically when I came into that job, and I'll just bring everybody in the room back to this point. Bill Haslam won his race for governor in 2010. We came into office, and he reached out to me and a couple of other folks in the private sector to say, hey, Bill, would you come in and help me stand up the new government? Would you run the economic development portfolio? When we arrived, we had a $1.6 billion budget shortfall that we had to deal with, and on a $31 billion budget, that was pretty significant. We also had to deal with this. Tennessee was in the bottom half of the economic metrics. You all watch this every day, but our unemployment rate was above the national average, our wage growth, our GDP growth, below the national average. We were in the bottom half of every metric, and we needed a turnaround. We also had to do things differently because of the situation with the budget shortfall. So given my background in business, we did a restructuring of the department. A new blueprint was laid. We reduced the positions by over 40%, but we started recruiting in a different manner. And the advantages that I mentioned were certainly present, but there are a couple more advantages that I'll point to at a national level that I think make us even more competitive today. One of them is the Working Families Tax Cut Act, or some call it the Big Beautiful Bill, that was passed last year. The provisions of that bill began to take hold in January of this year. And we have created the greatest incentives, I should say, for capital investment that we've seen in our lifetimes here in America. The other thing that's happened is that trade deals have been negotiated. Take Japan, for example, a country I know very well, $550 billion committed to invest in America. 40 billion of that was just announced. That's going to go into TVA projects to bring small modular reactors here with GE and Hitachi. We've got a $350 billion commitment from South Korea, and the list goes on and on and on. Trillions of dollars are stacked up at the borders right now with commitments to come to the United States. So we have the incentives in our tax structure to come, and we have the capital and the desire to move our direction, which means far greater productivity coming from those investments. At the same time, the administration is going through a massive effort to review the regulations that are in place. And I don't have to tell anybody in this room, there's a lot of sclerosis in regulations at the federal level. It happens at the state and the local level as well. So think about permitting reform. Think about a lot of the compliance stuff that just drive people nuts. We're working extremely hard to try to take away this regulatory burden. And just to put it into context, the estimate is a broad range, but under the prior 4 years of the Biden administration, the incremental cost of complying with those regulations that were put in place during those 4 years, $4 to $8 trillion drag chute on the economy. I mean, that's just a direct impact on your business. So we're going through streamlining, right-sizing, taking some of the theology out of this stuff, and really trying to make the nation as competitive as we possibly can. And I'm confident that we definitely will be there. So it's a different environment today. I think Tennessee continues the blueprint that we designed, and implemented back in 2011. Stuart McWhorter and his team are terrific, the best in the country, and they continue to execute beyond all my hopes and expectations. We've been so fortunate to have great people in that job and great governors that have supported that. And I just see that continuing. And again, the playing field, the horizon to me looks even brighter today.
Senator, sticking with you on this one, you've really been leading the way on driving changes in the financial sector and capital markets, so that America can keep up with and remain a leader in some of the latest technological advances that are happening. Can you talk about what some of those efforts are and share how that might result in greater investments in domestic manufacturing and access to capital?
Well, I'll come back to the big, beautiful bill. Again, the tax incentives and the structure are very favorable there. And I think, Tennessee has done a very good job with its tax structure and regulatory structure. At the same time that's happening, we've got other states, and I just met with a guy from California today that's moving out, and this is happening more and more. People are fleeing the state, and that's because of tax policy, and in some circumstances. There are other reasons, I'm sure. But I think we've had, broadly speaking, at a macro level, a very favorable tax environment right now to make capital investment, and that's both at federal and state level. If I think about where this is going to go from a trade standpoint, there were a lot of consternation back in April of last year, and you remember the stock market's reaction, et cetera, when the president announced the new tariffs, but that was the beginning of a negotiating process. Most of these tariffs have settled down to about 15%. There's noise, and we'll probably get to that in terms of the Supreme Court ruling. But what we see is enough tariff to make certain that President Trump has the leverage to see that the countries that have made deals with us comply with those deals. But I can see us moving back toward a lower tariff and just continuing to move down as these countries comply with their commitments. And my view is that we're going to have new alliances that are even stronger than other. I have been working, we'll do the 4th annual trilateral executive dialogue this year between CEOs in South Korea, Japan, and America. And the TED, we call it for short, has been instrumental in trying to create harmonization, if you will, between our regulations in our capital markets with those of close allies like Japan and South Korea. And if we can harmonize on our standards, we create greater potential for economies of scale. We are more competitive in total. You think about Japan's competitiveness in the machines that they make for semiconductor manufacturing. South Korea has a different set of competitive dynamics, and the United States, the largest market. There's a lot of reasons to like this, and more may join that model. So I remain optimistic that we've got the right formula that we're putting in place. We'll continue to execute on it.
You both have alluded to this, but we've seen an intentional effort by the Trump administration to focus more on domestic production, particularly when it comes to defense industrial base, advanced manufacturing, and the critical minerals supply chain. Hank, I believe you've referred to this as a generational investment opportunity. Can you talk about both the public policy that is enabling this and also how this is leading to opportunities for companies in Tennessee like Amaero?
If you look at the current Congress and this administration, so much has been done from a budget standpoint, but so much has been done from a non-budget standpoint. I think it's been really helpful to business. If you look at it's hard for a small business to have the U.S. government as a customer, right? The demand signal, the contracting, the procurement, all these things are challenges for a small business. And yet I think one thing that's been lost and maybe not fully appreciated, given the painful FY25 CR we went through and the government shutdown last fall, but through those negotiations, we got significant reform on contracting and procurement and planning. That is a big, big deal to businesses such as Amaero that are trying to conduct business with our government. I think in addition to that, we've been in a somewhat broken process of single-year appropriations. By the way, here we are sit today with Homeland Security not funded. We've got to find a way as a country to do those things better. But the things that we have done that make it easier to work with our government on the demand signal side, the procurement side, the contracting side, I think are really, really important. And the reforms that probably as long as we can remember, every administration said they were going to tackle, and no other administration has. But we've made real progress in some of those areas.
Senator, any thoughts about the public policy environment, just in terms of what the Trump administration has tried to do in that regard, particularly when it comes to the defense sector, critical minerals, things like that?
Well, there's a massive effort underway to bring back critical manufacturing to the United States. Hank alluded to it. You sure don't want your supply chain running through China right now when they've demonstrated their willingness to use any single source of failure as a choke point on the rest of the world. They did it to Japan back in 2010. There was literally a fishing dispute that took place, and they decided to choke Japan on rare earth minerals. The Japanese have gone from roughly 90% dependency on China to that point to 60%. Now they're working with us, and a lot of that $550 billion is going to be aimed at lowering that sort of dependency. But we're going to be very focused, I should say, on our national security as we think about our economic security as well. So we'll focus on rare earth minerals. We'll focus on production capacity. Again, it's going to take a little bit of time. It's going to take a runway. But I'm optimistic that this administration is focused on the right things right now with respect to our national security and defense.
Senator, you mentioned earlier, you alluded to tariffs, and you talked a little bit about that, but maybe to specifically think about the Supreme Court decision. What we hear a lot from member companies and other businesses is the fact that they just want certainty and they want predictability to the extent possible. So, in your mind, what does this recent Supreme Court decision do in terms of helping shape or make permanent, in a sense, this tariff environment that we're in, and how should Tennessee manufacturers view this dynamic in terms of the decisions they make?
So the Supreme Court decision said that the power that was executed or authorized by the president, the emergency powers, extended too far. But they also acknowledged his power in other areas. So I've had extensive conversations with Jamison Greer, who's our U.S. trade representative, and he's going to use other tools to go back in and basically replace the 15% level tariffs for the most part. The countries on the other side of it, I think, already see this, and they're not changing their commitments. They're not changing their deals. I'm sure that some of those countries would like to see if they could outweight us, and I've had some very straightforward and stern conversations with trade ministers and foreign ministers around the globe to not try that one. It's a move that we can identify, and we're not going to appreciate it. So I think the momentum is still there. We're going to address the Supreme Court decision. I say we, the administration, will do it in a technical manner that is a little bit slower than the way the president wanted to start out, but Jamison's done a lot of the work, and a lot of the pieces are already in place. The negotiations have happened in a number of situations. He's just going to bring it back to parity with where it was. The dislocation that's going to create in terms of doing refunds, et cetera, it's going to be cumbersome, but they know how to do it.
Hank, your perspective as a business leader and an investor, and how your company or other companies should adapt to the tariff environment?
I think you're right. I think that as someone allocating a budget, as someone allocating capital, you want to have a certain amount of predictability in what the environment's going to be. At the very same time, I think it's just necessary. I think it's necessary as a country that we go through these things. Probably no one has been more impacted adversely by some of these actions than our farmers. And yet you don't hear the farmers saying, go the other direction. You hear the farmers saying, this is something we need to do. Stay with it, see it through. And I'll give you an example, and this is the state impact of controlled resources. We import titanium bar. We've got a long-term supply agreement with a world-class company in the U.S. called Perryman, and we've got a aerospace mill in China. We import titanium bar from the aerospace mill in China at $17 a kg. Put a 50% tariff on that, you're at about $24 landed. My bar out of the U.S. is $48. After a 50% tariff, it's 100% more expensive, right? The only way you get there is state subsidization, right? You don't get there without China subsidizing these industries and taking non-economic measures. And so would I like as a business that it was all predictable today? Yes. But at the same time, I want to see us see this through for our kids' sake and our grandkids.
So this will be a chance to put in a pitch for my act called Restoring American Mineral Security Act. I've got bipartisan support on this, and our goal is to make certain that anytime an adversary like China does exactly what Hank described, we're going to align with our allies, and we're going to basically take away that subsidy differential with tariffs.
So our final question, we've got nearly 250 people here registered for this event today, which we're really grateful for. A variety of companies, multiple different sectors in the Tennessee economy. What advice would you give these companies, these individuals, about the best way to engage in the public policy conversations to ensure their voices are heard on the critical issues that are impacting their businesses? So I'd love to hear that from your perspective as a senator and your perspective, Hank, as a business leader.
Well, I hope Hank's a good example of how your voice can be heard, because our office, and again, I take a business philosophy to this. I opened up a new office in Tennessee. We now have 7 offices for my Senate position across the state of Tennessee. And I have field officers in each of those offices and teams there. Their job is to do outreach and connect with with leaders in the community. We basically do an economic development tour every year to go around and see and speak with business leaders so I can hear directly from them. But every week I get a rundown from every one of my field representatives. What are they hearing in the field? Who did they speak with? Which companies are there? What are the barriers? What are the hurdles? What might we do to be helpful? And I've instructed my team, I don't ever want to hear them say, hey, that's a state issue or a local issue. We know the state folks well. We're going to introduce them. We're going to hold their hand. We're going to walk them through it. And Hank, I think you've had an opportunity to touch every level here. You'll be able to speak from experience. But my goal is to make certain that we are listening every day, that my people on the ground are reaching out. And if you don't know my field office representative in your area, please just look on the website at mysenate.gov website, and you'll be able to quickly find that. Go have coffee with them, invite them over, whatever you'd like to do, but you should be working with us.
Yeah, the very first question, I believe, was what makes Tennessee unique? And this is one of those things that makes Tennessee unique. The accessibility, the access and the reach with the delegates in Tennessee is remarkable, and it matters. It matters particularly for small business. In general, I'm for smaller government, but there's a place for a public-private partnership. And I think at the federal level with the senator, where there's been incredible assistance as we've tried to navigate some of these issues, at the state level, the governor's office, economic development, Stuart McWhorter's office, and what the Senator Hagerty, the position he had before, has been incredibly helpful. And then all the way down the local area. And the one thing that I would just say is get involved. Get involved. Take accountability. And I think each of us bring a perspective as a small business owner, as a small business worker, that's really, really important in the ecosystem. And if we want to build on the momentum Tennessee has, each of us must be accountable. Each of us must contribute to that. But I think we're very fortunate to have the leadership we've got as the state representatives in Washington as well as in Nashville.
Well, thank you for those final comments and that encouragement to our folks in the audience, because it is important to engage, and I think by the presence of these folks in the room, that it shows that they want to engage and they want to be part of the conversation. As I said at the outset, we are very fortunate in Tennessee to have a senator like Bill Hagerty. He does a tremendous job representing us Senator, thank you for being here. Hank, thank you as well for your participation. Let's show them our appreciation.